Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Lately, I've been feeling like I'm in kind of a rut. I haven't been scrapbooking as much this summer as I usually do, and I just wanted to try something a little bit different. And so I decided that I was going to mix things up and try not to think so much about my backgrounds. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more fun and relaxing and see where it took me, and I was happy with the results, so I'm sharing it with you. Instead of applying the paint to the paper, I decided I was going to dip the paper into the paint, which is on my glass table. I used two different paints. The first one that I used is more of a blue color. That's a Shimmerz Paints Vibez, and the name of the color is Love Ocean Number 9. And I also used a Shimmerz called Jilted Jade. And those are two of the paints from the Shimmerz Color Kitz collection from August. And I thought that they would go well together to make a summery background. I didn't really have any particular pattern in mind. I'm just having fun and playing with the colors and the paper and seeing what happens. I add the paint to the glass surface and then I add some water to it to help the paint move around a little bit. And I'm just looking for a watercolor background. I have my watercolor brush on hand so that I can move the paint around if I need to. But for the most part, I move the color by pressing my paper against the paint. Usually I use the packaging technique where you take a piece of plastic and you put the paint on the plastic and then smush it down against your paper. And you have a lot more control with that method, but I didn't want control. I wanted to just have fun, play around, and see what the colors looked like when I was done. And I didn't have any kind of a composition in mind. I decided to just go with the flow. And I dried the background to kind of set what I already had onto the paper, and then I continued with more paint to build up the layers of color. I usually use gessoed smooth white cardstock, but this time I'm using 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. I thought that using the watercolor paper would go well for this particular technique. I have some color in the background. I thought I would add some splatters. I didn't want them to be too dark, so I rolled my paper towel over the top. You can still see them, but now they're a little bit more faint. And now I'm going to add some stamping. I'm using some Staz On Ink. The color is called Dove Gray, and I'm using a grid stamp. I got a set of grid stamps from Amazon. It's a whole bunch of different types of grids, different scales and sizes, and so I thought I would give that a try on the background. Next, I used another color of Staz On. This one is called Teal Blue. I thought it would go well with the blues in the background. This is one of my favorite stamps. It's an older rubber stamp that is script writing. And so I wanted to add a little bit of writing to the background. I feel like writing goes well with pretty much any layout. Another thing that I love to add to backgrounds is dots. And one of my favorite dot stamps is a Tim Holtz stamp. So I'm using that once again with the teal blue Staz On Ink. And I try to keep the stamping to the area that I've already added color to. I think that's the best way to get the results that I want. I also am layering the stamping together in some places. I don't really worry about overlapping the stamping. I think that it actually creates kind of a cool look when you have a number of different textures in the same area. And I really like the way the script writing looks in the background with the teal ink, so I added another round of color using that stamp. I am also going to add some stamping using the gray ink and this dot stamp. I believe this is a Studio Calico stamp from quite a few years ago. Like the other stamps that I use, I think that this dot stamp goes really well on any background. The Tim Holtz dot stamp is a lot of very tiny but different sized dots, and this one is more of a regular pattern of dots, and the dots are much larger. I also had this Flourish rubber stamp in my stash, so I thought I would try a little bit of this. I wanted it to be more subtle, so I decided to use the gray rather than the blue. The blue is much bolder. And you can see a few hints of these flourishes in the final product, but I only added a touch of this stamp. My goal here was just to create a really fun background, so I tried not to think too much about the stamping. I just kept stamping until I felt that I had done enough, and now I'm moving on to some stenciling. So this stencil is made by Picket Fence Studios and it's called Floral Damask. To me, the shape looked a little bit like a seashell, so I thought that would be perfect because of the beach-themed tropical layout that I'm going to be making. And I used that same Staz On Ink in teal blue and a dauber to use with the stencil. And I didn't really think about it until later when I went to clean my stencil, but the Staz On Ink is kind of hard to get off of the stencil, but I was able to use a Staz On spray that you use to clean your rubber stamps, and that took the ink right off of the stencil. So just a little tip, just in case you have the same experience. Now I'm going to add some modeling paste to the background. I actually mix a few things together. I mix some regular modeling paste together with some Ranger texture paste, and then I also add in some thick body acrylic paint. And I'm not sure what happened to the packaging for this stencil. I did have it in packaging, but there was nothing identifying the manufacturer of the stencil. But I believe that it's made by a company called Art Anthology. And I'm just using the center of the stencil where there are some diamonds. On either side of the stencil, there are some, looks to be like big water droplets or splashes. I'm not using that part of the stencil. I just wanted to add a little bit of a geometric texture to all of those areas where I have the paint on the background. The reason for adding the acrylic paint to my little mixture is it makes the modeling paste a very crisp white. And I really like that about it, but it also means that as soon as I'm done using the stencil, I have to go clean it because the paint will often dry on the stencil, and that's much harder to get off the stencil than just regular modeling paste. And then I like to add the Ranger texture paste because that is kind of shiny and it's a little more translucent, and I like the way it gives the final effect a cool, like I said, shiny look to it. When I went back into an area to add more stenciling, I tried to make sure that I had the pattern lined up. I also tried to be careful not to smudge the modeling paste that was already down on the layout. I thought that the background could use some more splatters, so I'm using the Love Potion number 9, and I'm adding them, again, all over the areas that I had already added the color to, but of course, splatters went all over the page, but that's where I tried to concentrate them. So I'm pretty happy with the way the background looks. I'm not really sure how I'm going to proceed, but I do have a whole bunch of shapes that I fussy cut out from one of the pattern papers. So I'm going to be spreading those all around the layout just as soon as I'm done adding all the splatters and the background is dry. And I also had my photo selected. You could see it in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I think that the photo will go along with the August kit really well. It has a summery tropical theme to it. And I love all of the bold, bright colors, which you'll see in a few moments when I add the embellishments to the page. So now I'm adding a few more splatters. I am now using the Jilted Jade, and I use that along with the Love Ocean number 9 and mix them together a little bit. I wanted to make sure that the background didn't look too green, that it looked a little bit more on the blue side. So here are some of those beautiful elements that I fussy cut out of one of the pattern papers. As soon as I saw it, I knew that I was going to have to fussy cut the whole sheet. There were lots of these really large tropical flowers, which I really, really love. So I use a couple of different colors of Distrress Oxide to ink the edges. For all of the green elements, I'm using Rustic Wilderness. For the pink ones, I used some picked raspberry. And then for all of the yellow flowers, mainly, I used fossilized amber. And there's something about inking the edges of fussy cut or die cut pieces that I just love. I just love the tiny bit of darkness it adds to the edges. I didn't do very much planning for this layout, but I did plan out the title. I'm using one of the die cut pieces that says Sunny Days. I inked it earlier, and I'm going to be adding a piece of pink paper behind that to make it stand out a little bit more. And then to mount my photo, I used this piece of green pattern paper. And when I put it on top of the background, I really loved the way all of the colors kind of vibrated and went together. And then I think when I add all of the green leaves to the layout, it looks even better. So I was really happy with the way this pattern paper went with my background. I'm popping my photo up on some foam. That way there'll be a little bit of dimension to it. I'm going to be popping my photo up and then a couple of the other elements on the layout as well. My go-to place for my photo is usually smack dab in the center of the page. I've noticed that lately I have been trying it in the upper right-hand corner more often, and I thought that I would do the same thing for this layout. I'm trying very hard to, as I said earlier, kind of go with the flow, not overthink things, and try to really enjoy the process without stressing about where the elements are going, just kind of put down what feels right. And then after I had my photo in place, I began placing all the embellishments all around it. I love the combination of these bright yellow flowers with these fuchsia flowers. There's one, I actually just put it on the layout, that is such a beautiful bright color. I absolutely love the combination. So in every place that I have the yellow flowers, I also added some of the pink flowers around them, and I think that it's a really nice combination. As I was adding the embellishments to the background, I was thinking that my title would probably look best in the upper left-hand corner. So that's why I used a flower that was one of the ones that went off the side of the page to place up there, because I knew that I was going to layer the title on top of it. So the side of that flower that doesn't have all of its petals wouldn't be noticeable because the title would cover it up. I love to fussy cut flowers and other images out of pattern papers. I love the way you end up with a big stack of kind of like die cut pieces. And I used to ignore the pieces that were going off the edge of the page because I figured you really can't use the images unless they're complete. But now I will cut out every last image that's on a page. I very often will use half flowers and 3/4 branches. I find that they're perfect to tuck behind things and they come in really handy. So now when I'm done fussy cutting out a piece of pattern paper, there's almost nothing left. I have my fussy cut pieces and then I have a couple of scraps. Now I am attaching everything down. I, once again, didn't overthink it. I placed the embellishments on the page and then I was happy with the way that they looked, so I just started attaching them down. I pop up all of the yellow flowers on the page on some fun foam, except for the small one that's behind the title. Because that one's behind the title, I didn't want to pop that up, but I pop up all the others. I also add some foam to the back of the title once I assemble it, and then to a couple of the pink flowers on the page. Not all of them, it depended on the cluster. For the cluster in the lower left-hand corner, I popped up the smaller pink flower, but not the larger one. And I tried to cut the strips of foam very, very thin so that you wouldn't be able to see that green color from the front when you looked at the layout. In addition to the flowers, I have a number of leaves in that cluster. I have some larger ones, and then I also have some very small ones. I didn't include the footage of attaching all of these pieces down to the page, but I went around to each cluster. I arranged the flowers and the leaves. In some cases, I popped some of them up, and then I used ATG adhesive to attach everything down. So now I'm adding some die cut pieces to the layout. I'm adding a hummingbird, a parrot, and a turtle. The ephemera pieces come with a white border, which can come in really handy at times, but for this layout, I was thinking that the animals that I chose would look better without that white border. So I cut the border off and then I attached those 3 die cuts down to the page. And now I'm ready to trim the excess off of the edge of my layout. So since there were lots and lots of leaves on this piece of pattern paper that I fussy cut, I focused on the larger ones, but once I had all of the larger ones attached down, I was thinking that it would look nice to add some of the smaller ones to each of the clusters. I always love the contrast between the larger elements and the smaller elements, so I like to add little details like this. I think that it really makes the clusters come together. When I make clusters, I often find that there are some spots that look like they can be filled in. So that's what I did with these little leaves. I looked for those areas that needed a little bit something more, and I added a small leaf. Or if one leaf didn't look like it was quite enough, I added 2 leaves to the cluster. And then after I found a place for each of those leaves, I used ATG adhesive to attach them down. And I don't know what's with my head these days, but no sooner did I put a lot of those little leaves on the layout that I forgot where I'd put them. So when that happens, I give the page a little shake, and that usually reveals which leaves or elements have to be attached down. I think this layout kind of demonstrates why I love photo corners so much. I added these bright pink photo corners. I used the same pattern paper to punch these out that I used to back the title. And I think you could really see here how it looks nice to bring that pink color close to the photo. I think it adds a nice touch and kind of balances the colors on the layout. I also added some pearls to those photo corners. And then I rearranged the cluster by the photo. I noticed all of the yellow flowers were singles on the page, and I was thinking it might look better if I had this larger and smaller one touching each other in a little cluster rather than having them spread out. So I reworked that cluster a little bit, and I ended up liking that much better. Right now I'm adding one of the dots from this kit. It's the only thing on the page that's orange, but I had to add it because it has an image of palm trees on it. And I thought I could always add some more orange to the page, but because it's the same intensity, the same brightness as the flowers, I think that it matched right in, and I didn't feel like I had to add any more orange. I was also told by my daughters that I could use a little bit of bling on the page. So I had a sheet of very, very bright, sparkly jewels. I added those to the centers of all of my flowers, and now the layout is complete. And here are some close-ups. I hope that if you like the way this layout turns out, that you'll give this method of making a mixed media background a try. I found it very fun. I didn't overthink it, I didn't stress, and I had a great time making this layout. When you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, use my name in the comments box and you'll receive a free gift. In the description box, you'll find the link to the Shimmerz website and also to this month's Color Kitz collection if you would like to check those out. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.